Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pathways to Breaking the Cycle. Another awesome episode, and I get the lovely opportunity to sit here with Rodrigo Rodriguez from La Placita and Victor and Chewy from La Placita. Welcome, you guys. I'm
Hello.
very excited to be sitting here with you guys tonight to discuss a very important topic that I think our community needs to be aware of, right? So if Rodrigo, if you could just explain to us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. My name is Rodrigo. I'm a community organizer, and now I'm the director of the Justice for Youth Community Collaborative, which is housed at La Placita Institute. I'm also the director of community organizing there at La Placita, but just a long time organizer and advocate, activist here in Albuquerque, working with a lot of young people all over the city, all over the state. Um, so I brought two of my young guys with me who were trying to, develop their leadership and work with other young folks. The collaborative is 28 organizations who all work in and around the juvenile justice system in various capacities. So some are like leadership development organizations, some do community organizing, some do mental health. Um, we also have a skateboard company. That's where we got
I
Victor.
was just talking to him about that.
Um,
That's awesome.
we have young folks who are doing music. We have young folks who are starting businesses. Really just trying to bring folks together and really address some of the things that are happening in our city when it comes to our young people.
Awesome.
La Placita is like an intervention organization that does a lot of community work and healing work, traditional healing, intervention, working inside the D home, working inside the jails, working with people coming home, doing case management, pathways navigating. So La Placita is like the hub, and the Justice for Youth Community Collaborative is one of our projects.
That's awesome. So that's the meeting that I attended last Wednesday, right? That's what you're
Yeah.
talking about,
Yep.
the
Yep.
collaborative meeting.
So
That was really awesome. I was just telling Chewy that it was so informative that I want to go back because
yeah.
I just don't know a
Yeah.
lot about the juvenile justice because my son wasn't incarcerated in JDC at all.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
He did go to YDDC for another charge that he had after he was already in the adult system,
Mm.
but he didn't. He skipped over JDC. So
Switch it.
I don't know a whole lot about juvenile law, but going to that meeting last week, it was just so informative about everything across the board, really. I was talking to Chewy earlier, and I was telling him that, being on social media and being that I am so open about what I stand for and for advocacy, I get a lot of, you know, lashing from people, and people will message me and say like, "You're sick. How could you stand for these kids?" and stuff like that. What would you say to people in the community about our youth that are hurting?
Shoot, I would say shut up.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
we live in a city, we live in a state with some of the worst outcomes for kids,
Right.
right? And you look at, the things like adverse childhood experiences, they call them ACEs. You look at some of the indicators of like what it means to raise a child or to be a child, according to something called the Kids Count Report, which is produced by the Annie Casey Foundation, that tracks those childhood indicators. This is the worst place to be a kid consistently, year after year. It's the worst place to raise a kid, too, consistently, year after year. I was reading a study recently that 79% of fourth graders can't read. So we're in a state, we're in a city, we're in communities that are broken, right? We have young people who are hurting. We have communities and families that are hurting. We have people who are destitute, you know what I mean? Poor. Some of the poorest people in the country live in this state. We
Right.
have folks who are desperate. We have folks who are experiencing not just those adverse childhood experiences, but generational traumas,
Right.
right? They're going through generational poverty. A lot of folks are going through generational drug addictions. A lot of folks are dealing with generational traumas, violence, other things happening in their families, in their homes, in their communities. So we could, lock up every kid in the city and we would still have all of those problems,
Right.
right? We would still be the worst place to raise a kid. We
Right.
would still be the worst place to be a kid. So yeah, we have some young folks who have done some really terrible things, and they, first of all, we need to figure out like what happened to those kids in their lives that led them to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then second, we need to give them an opportunity to first repair the harm that they did.
Right.
And then second, to grow and to change and to come back to our communities healed as their full selves, ready to give back, ready to be like contributors to our communities.
Right.
So, this mentality of like lock them up and throw away the key is just, it's misguided at best. It's toxic. You know what I mean? Don't read the Facebook comments. I always tell folks like never ever read the comments.
I unfollowed all that stuff because it infuriates
It's
me.
bad. Everyone thinks they're an expert. Everyone thinks that they have the answers, and none of them are coming to these meetings. None of them are engaging in meaningful ways.
Right.
They're lashing out in harmful ways. And I mean, it speaks more to, like I said, the broken community that we're from than it actually
Exactly.
does any grounded place in policy or anything that would actually help anybody,
Right.
So just don't read the Facebook comments.
Yeah.
That's really all I can say.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I stay off of it. Um, one thing that I have noticed, like when my son was out there, running the streets, they were doing the thing about, what licks, you know what I mean? Robbing
Right.
Yeah,
robbing
hit a lick.
people.
Yep.
And that's what my kid was doing. And it's almost like I see it as like a domino effect because I feel like kids are still doing that same thing that my kid was doing. And that was what he was 16. So that was 6 years ago. What do you feel is, where do you feel that that's coming from?
I mean, we were doing that 20 years ago.
Right.
When I was a
How come-
teenager.
yeah, I never,
When I was a teenager in this town, like that's
yeah.
it was the same, and that's what I'm getting at, right? It's a
Okay.
cycle. It's cyclical.
Okay.
So like, I came from a single parent home. My brother was incarcerated.
Right.
My dad was a drug addict. My family has all this like generational trauma, and I was an angry dude. I was an angry young kid. And so I found that acceptance and that belonging wherever I could,
That's
with the
how- yeah.
homies, in the hood, in the streets, wherever. And we would just, do crazy stuff because there was nothing else to do in this town either.
Right.
You know what I mean? We're in a community that doesn't have any outlets for our young folks. And then we wonder why young folks act out.
Yeah, because they don't have anywhere to go. Like, at least before we had the beach at one time, which was fun to go to, but we don't have anything here.
Yeah, well, and a lot of stuff that we do have costs money.
Yeah.
And if you're 14, 13, 12 years old, you can't have a job. So you
Right.
don't have any money, and you're
Right.
probably from a home where you don't have a lot of expendable income or resources. I was just dropping my daughter off at baseball, and that's why I was late. It was $200 to sign her up for
Yeah.
baseball. She's 8 years old. You know what I mean? And as she gets older, it's just going to get more expensive.
And that's what I think Chris and I had that discussion when he sat on the podcast about when Sam Bregman was going into the schools and talking about his son being a professional baseball player and that they
Right.
need to get into sports and do this, that,
Right.
and the other. But what they don't understand is like, why are they not providing programs for these kids to join those
Right.
types of sports? Because they are expensive, and
Right.
not just expensive the one-time fee.
Right.
It's throughout the whole school year.
Right.
You know.
My daddy wasn't a lawyer. You know what I
Right.
mean? He wasn't around to pay for my baseball.
Right.
So we
Right.
made do with what we had.
Right.
And I was fortunate to find like community organizing and community people who took me in, took an interest in me, and invested in me in a real way that was like, okay, this young person can like turn his life around, and
Right.
he's valuable. And I think all young people are valuable in that same way.
Right.
And it takes like community to kind of lift that up for folks.
Right. And that's what I see too, like going back to the whole like Facebook comments when you read like the negativity. And I really feel like this is just my opinion. People like what is that? What is the news, the hotspot ABQ and the other
ABQ
one?
Raw.
Yeah,
ABQ
ABQ
Raw.
Yeah.
Yeah, I unfollowed them. But anyway, I feel like they put out this like negative connotation and this negative shit. So then everybody else it's like they put that energy out there. So then everybody feeds off of it. And it just kind of like,
It's ambulance chasing. It's like, it's just old school like shit stirring.
right.
And ABQ Raw is particularly bad about it,
Right.
and the way that they talk about people, the way they talk about community members. It's sensationalism. They're there to stir it up and get the comments going, and that drives whatever revenue or whatever money they're getting from their Facebook pages and their views and their clicks and their likes.
Yeah.
it's intentional too, right? It's about dehumanizing folks. It's
Mm-hmm.
about creating this kind of divide within the community, which allows for things like mass incarceration to start happening. It allows for the National Guard to show up in the neighborhoods. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's intentional. You know what I mean? It's not like they're also not journalists, so they're not playing by the rules. They don't have to follow their journalistic ethics because they're not journalists. They're podcasters or they're, you know,
Retired cops.
retired police
Yeah.
officer, photographer, whatever it is that
Yeah.
those guys are doing. And then they're also like working with the cops, right? They're working, they show up before the first responders even get there
Mm-hmm.
because they're getting inside information about shit that's happening. And they're showing up before ambulances get there a lot of times, before the police even get there. ABQ Raw is out there.
Right.
Um, and I think recently they were arresting some kids in the international district and they were just putting their faces all over the place.
Oh, I saw that.
And we, I thought this was America. I thought we were like innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
And I thought that there was like due process, even for young people, there should be due process, right? So
Right.
just to like blast young people's faces all over the social media, whether or not they did anything, and you don't even really know, you're just there with a camera. Um, like I said, it's like it's bad. It's at the very least like it's sensationalist, and at the worst, it's like harmful.
Right.
It's actively harmful.
Right. Yeah, it's just even with my kid, I've discussed this with Celinda several times about the school to prison pipeline because I never even knew that even that word existed, until I started having problems with my kid, and I fought for my son year after year in school, advocating for him because he had a hard time learning, cognitively. He was just like, he didn't like sitting at a desk and focusing. He was more like artistic and creative. And, he was demeaned a lot. He was the kid that they always put at the back of the classroom. And, I had him tested all the time and just wanted to help him. And it wasn't until he was a freshman in high school where they gave him an IEP. And at the time, I'm thinking, well, this is going to help him, right? This is going to help him to focus. But what kid that's trying to find their identity in high school wants to go into a special ed class
Yeah.
as a freshman? So he's like, I'm not doing it. I'm not going into special ed class.
Yeah.
So then it just like, the demeaning just continued, and Celinda told me, she's like, that's the whole school to prison pipeline thing. My kid was skateboarding at Osuna Elementary because they had stairs there. So they used to like to skateboard there a lot. And they were skateboarding there one night, and there was those little wood chips on the playground. So they lit a fire because it was winter. So they all sat around it. Thank God there was cameras. They all sat around it, warmed up, and then when they were getting ready to leave, they all urinated on it to put it out. But the embers were still lit at the bottom, so it's grew into a bigger fire and then burned the slide. Well, that was on a Saturday. He goes to Sandia High School. When he goes back to school on Monday, they expel him from school. It didn't even happen at Sandia. They expel him from school, and not only did they expel him from school, but then they send him to the Eubank complex, where a little like yellow bus comes and picks him up, and a cop is on there and wants him. And I'm mortified because I'm like, seriously, you're treating my kid like a criminal, So then I wanted to start taking him to school, and they're like, sorry, that's not how it works here. So now I understand what the school to prison pipeline is, but could you explain a little more in depth?
Yeah, it's exactly that. We like I said, this is a state with the worst educational system in the country.
Right.
Albuquerque public schools is like notoriously bad,
Mm-hmm.
and it's notoriously even worse if you're like a kid who doesn't fit into one of those boxes.
Right.
I was 12 years old the first time I got arrested at Jefferson Middle School for fighting, and from there it was just like on and off probation, in and out of the system until I was 28 when my daughter was born. Um, and it starts as, especially, and there's all kinds of data and information that kind of proves these points, right? That like young men of color, particularly young black and brown boys, are viewed as much older than their actual age.
Right.
So you see cases like Tamir Rice in Cleveland, who was a 12-year-old boy, was murdered by the police. And when they shot him, they were on the radio calling in that they had shot a black male who they thought was 20 years old. He was 12 years old. He was a sixth grader.
Jesus.
So they think that, first of all, young men are older than they actually are, than they appear, and they're treated differently as well, right? They're treated like they're older. Um, they're inherently treated like criminals. They're
Mm-hmm.
treated with more like, you know, punitive measures. They're viewed with more like what they call criminality, that they're more prone to criminality. And it starts at that very young age. It starts at fifth, sixth grade. And, you know, there is a reason why we have cops on our school campuses, you
Right.
know, and there's a reason why so many young people who get, you know, caught up in those systems don't graduate, right? Or that once you get kicked out of an Albuquerque public school, they don't let you back into an Albuquerque public school.
Mm-hmm.
They put you into these specialized programs or to a charter school. Um, you
Which
know,
I think kids are better off going to charter schools than APS
I mean,
sometimes.
some charter schools are just as bad. You know
Are
what I mean?
they?
Some charter schools just kind of recreate that those negative, you know,
I guess I went to a charter school,
environments.
so I feel like it was better for me as far as like the learning, versus going to West Mesa because that's
Yeah.
the school that I
Some
went
kids
to.
do better at charter schools. You know, they're smaller schools, smaller class sizes. Some of them are more specialized. They
Right.
have different opportunities for young people, whether it's, you know, arts and sciences or
Yeah.
performing arts, different like specialties. But a lot of charter schools just recreate Albuquerque public school dynamics in, you know, smaller campuses.
Hmm.
And so I went to charter schools as well. I ended up dropping out at 16, and I just got my GED and started at CNM right away. Um, I was like an honor roll student. I've always been a smart kid, but
Jeez.
I was like a bad kid, you know, according to the system. I was a kid who couldn't sit still. I was a kid who didn't, was like getting straight A's, but couldn't sit in a classroom.
Right.
And then they were afraid of me. You know, my teachers were, and they said that before. They were like, "He's a bully. We're afraid of him." And it's just because I didn't want to hear their bullshit, and I like didn't. I would fight with teachers. I would argue with them.
Right.
And
That was
by
Josiah.
middle school, I was smarter than most of my teachers. I felt like, you know what I mean, and I just didn't want to be there. But they couldn't kick me out because I was an honor roll student. So they, you know, found other ways
Wow.
to marginalize me, push me out, and that's the experience for a lot of folks, right? Is you're not there to play the game of like school.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's what they want. They want young people who are going to go through these certain, you know, into these certain molds. And if you don't
Right.
fit those molds, they just want you out of there.
Right.
They don't want you influencing the other kids. They don't want your toxic negativity in the classroom,
Yep.
even if you're getting good grades. So they push people out. And that's, you know, why we talk about it. When we talk about schools, we talk about like the school push out system,
Hmm.
because a lot of us didn't drop out. We were pushed out,
Yeah.
like
Josiah was pushed out,
actively
honestly.
pushed out by the
Right.
administrators, by the cops, by the principals, by the teachers. Um,
That or they want to medicate you because I mean, every time I went to a meeting to advocate for him, you need to put him on Adderall. You need to put him on Ritalin. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not doing that. I'm not medicating my kid. I'm sorry. I'm not doing it.
yeah, and it's all related, right? And it's all, even the IEP process is just various ways that they track the kids,
Right.
right? And they can look at, and it's
And they also get more money. Don't they get more money?
they look at third and fourth grade reading and math scores, right? And it's one of the reasons that they do standardized testing, so that they know how many prison beds to
But I say, yeah,
build.
they're getting your bed
You know what I
ready
mean?
whenever
They
they do those
look
kind of
at
tests.
how many kids are failing, and so that they know in 20 years we're gonna need this many beds
my
for those kids
God.
who can't read. And they do it all over the country. It happens everywhere. It
I
happens
did
in New
not know
Mexico. It
that.
happens in California. It happens in blue states, red states, rural communities, city communities. It happens everywhere.
Yeah. And you would know that because you travel a lot. you
I,
know?
you know, I'm blessed that my community like
Yeah.
invested in me, and I've been able to see a lot of things and meet a lot of
I think
people
that's so
doing work all
amazing.
over the place.
Right.
And it's one of the common threads that we see everywhere, from New York to Chicago, Denver, New Mexico, like everywhere I've been, and all the advocates that I've learned from, and all the young people that we've built with. Like, the system is the system, and it looks very similar everywhere you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna have the opportunity to go to Chicago with Celinda and Justin and Courtney in July, so I'm excited about that just to learn.
Chicago's a dope city.
I've
That's
never,
scary.
I honestly am not a traveler. I mean, I've been to California and Baltimore, and that's it. That's the
Chicago
extent
in the
of
summer is magical too. It's like,
really.
in the winter it's cold, but in the summer Chicago's like a really dope town.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Rodrigo took me to Chicago a couple years ago for an event, and I got scared.
Did
And
you?
Yeah,
like
panic
book,
attack.
I did. I booked my own flight home. The buildings are too big. You couldn't see the sky. You know what I'm saying? And coming from New Mexico, there's nothing like that here.
Oh
The tallest
shoot.
building is like what, maybe like 30 stories. And so
Yeah, I
it's
have
just like,
anxiety
nah.
too. I told Celinda, I
I
was like,
dipped
I'm
out.
not flying by myself over there. Make sure that I fly with somebody.
That straight flew home, direct flight back to Albuquerque because I was
Did
scared.
you?
Yeah, it was wild. But I do regret it now. I feel like as I'm older, I'd be more okay with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, traveling to bigger cities when you've never left your state is like scary for sure.
Okay, well, at least you're preparing me.
Yeah.
Oh, let's talk a little bit about legislation and what took place there.
Yeah. Shoot. I've been talking about this all day. So yeah, the legislative session happened. The governor, Sam Bregman, all those guys were really like gunning for young people. I think both of these guys spoke at the Roundhouse. We were able to defeat a lot of the bad bills that did come up, and there was just all this like intense rhetoric in the media, on social media. Like I said, everyone's an expert now. And we were able to, because of the community, because of young folks who showed up and shared their story and shared their voices, we were able to defeat some of those bills. But those proposals, particularly the Sam Bregman bill, HB 134, would have like opened up the floodgates for youth incarceration. It really would have taken us back to a time like in the 90s and the early 2000s when we had hundreds of young people going through the D home and YDDC. And what they were talking about was really like taking us back to the super predator era of the 90s. And it was some of the most intensive legislation, and again, working with community folks who have been in this fight for a long time, that's how folks were talking about it. It's the worst that we've seen in decades. The way that they're talking about young people, the way that they're, manufacturing crime statistics, and they're literally making shit up as we go. And again, it's not to discount some of the terrible tragedies that have happened. Like there have been some really high profile cases where young people have made some really bad decisions and people have been hurt, people have lost their lives.
Right.
And those are tragedies. You know what I mean? And I don't just see that as a tragedy for the folks that lost their lives in those, but all those young people's lives will never be the same. Some of them
Right.
will go to prison for a very long time. Some of them will come home from prison never the same. And
That's what's heartbreaking for me as a mom, knowing that my kid's not going to come out the same, you know?
it's tragic, man. It's tragic. And the further you are in that system, the harder it is to come home, right?
Yeah.
And that happens over and over and over again, right? And so just opening up the floodgates to like reincarcerate thousands of kids. And like I said earlier, we could lock up every teenager in town and we would still have a fentanyl crisis. We
Yeah.
would still have a gun violence crisis.
Yeah.
We would still have an opportunity crisis where young people don't have access to opportunities. We would still have the worst education system in the country. We would still have the worst outcomes for kids. Like all of those things would still be true if you locked up every teenager right now, right?
Right.
And just from some of the data that we have looked at, there are roughly, what did Albino say, 400,000 young people in the state of New Mexico, something like that. Less than 1% have committed violent crimes. And so to talk about young people in this like blanket way that they're all dangerous criminals and that they're the
They
worst of the
magnify
worst, that
everything.
they're the worst
Yeah.
criminals in the city. You know what I mean? This is Burke, bro. I know some pretty dangerous people.
Yeah.
And we're talking about teenagers,
Right.
like even the dangerous teenagers, and we get those kids at La Placita. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? We work with the worst of the worst kids that the media has thrown away, that the system has thrown away. Like they're welcome in our space.
Right.
You know what I mean? We're not afraid to work with the shooters and talk to the shooters and try to help them rebuild.
Right.
And each one of those kids has a story. You know what I mean? Every one of those kids has a story. Nobody grows up. Nobody wakes up one day and is just like, "Oh, I'm a criminal. I'm gonna go murder someone today." You know what I mean? It's all of these things that have happened in your life, in your community, in society. You know what I
Right.
mean? We also live in a society that's like actively crumbling around us,
Right.
right? The social safety nets are crumbling. Shit's bad. The adults are tripping. So how do you think young people feel?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Everybody's like in this tense, anxiety-ridden like state right now. So how do we think that young people are feeling?
How
You know
they
what I mean?
process, because we can't even process stuff
Exactly.
sometimes.
Exactly.
You know?
Young people's brains aren't fully developed either.
Right.
You know what I mean? So when we talk about like, oh, you made whatever decision, it's like, bro, you have half a brain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you're 14 years old. Your
Yeah.
brain still has 10 years of growth to happen. So we have these like, politicians on one side making all these like crazy pronouncements in the news, and on the other side is like community, right? And we're up there, we're screaming like this is not helpful. None of this is helpful,
Right.
right? And if you want to stop violence in our communities, you start by investing in those communities. You're not going to arrest your way out of a crisis. You're not going to arrest your way out of any of those crises, whether it's fentanyl or homelessness or gun violence. We've tried that, right? We
Right.
tried 30 years of mass incarceration and it didn't work, right? We're back at the place we were at before.
Right.
And there's just a disconnect between our political leaders, and it's really a failure on the political class of our state, right?
Hmm.
You can't blame young people for that because young people aren't even allowed to vote, most of them,
Mhm.
right? Unless you're 18, you're not allowed to vote.
Right.
So how do we blame them for the political failings of our state?
Yeah. I want to go back real quick because I know a lot of people don't know the language sometimes. When you say super predator program, can you explain to us what that means?
Yeah, that was a term that was coined in the 90s and made famous by Hillary Clinton. And they were talking about young people, in particular, like inner city young people of color, who they were calling super predators. And they were saying that they're the most violent, dangerous people we've ever seen. And they classified them, they were calling them super predators because
Hmm.
they're not, like, they don't have whatever, you know, thing in your brain that tells you not to do bad things, and they
Right.
were just calling them super predators as like a way again to like otherize them and make them into this second class of people who could be abused, incarcerated, and disappeared into the prison systems
Right.
because they were so dangerous.
I think a part of that narrative too is like the like young people aren't deserving of something good or like fun or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. Because it's like they feel like you have to everyone who's like an old person says, "Oh, you have to earn shit. You haven't earned anything yet. You haven't earned the right to have this luxury to just do something that's normal."
Right.
And so because of that, it's like no one wants to even have a conversation with a young person because of the attacks that are going on in the media and these rhetorics. There's like I've seen a lot more people, like older people walking around with guns now. They were scared about all the young people with all these guns. Now it's all these older people walking around with their gun right there on their hip, ready to shoot any young person that can approach them. And so it's just like, I was at the park the other day and some kid walked up to me. He was just trying to sell me some cookies. You know what I'm saying? And I bought them. But it's just like, I would probably not want my son to go up to some guy who has a gun on him trying to sell him some cookies because that guy,
Right.
he's already on edge.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? You walk around with that gun, you think you are saying if a young person does it, it's with intent to harm. So what's your intent then?
Yeah.
And so it's just like, you're not really providing a good example
Right.
by doing that kind of thing, those kind
Yeah.
of things.
Right. I mean, it's almost too like, APD. I was talking to my dad this morning and we were kind of, on that topic about them bringing in the National Guard and stuff like that. And I was telling my dad, I said, Dad, it's scary even with the cops. You know what I mean? Even for me to get pulled over, like even if I was to go down to pick something up because I'm Hispanic, I mean, they could target me because they have this trigger finger, you know what I mean? Where they're just shooting everybody nowadays, just like the guy a few months ago at that motel that they had cuffed in the back seat, and they shot
Mm-hmm.
him execution style, I think, or something. And it's stuff like that. It's like, how could people even, feel safe even with APD? You know?
Yeah, it set up a dynamic where we're seeing it, right. There was a kid who was murdered at the laundromat on Zuni in San Mateo, um, over a fight over a dryer. You know what I mean? And they got
Oh
into it,
wow!
and the husband showed up and he shot the 16-year-old kid in the parking lot.
Back.
And we're just in a moment right now, politically, as a community, all these things where like, yeah, it's dangerous, and folks are on edge,
Hmm.
and as we see, this political rhetoric ramp up, like we were talking about that the other day, like they're criminalized things, and so one day now it's skateboarding, now it's being a teenager, now it's riding those little scooters. You know what I mean? They brought those
Right.
scooters into town, and now they're gonna start ticketing people, and then like
Oh
any
shit! Are you
excuse to start
serious?
like
God.
messing with folks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And pulling people over and running your ID and checking your immigration status and all those things that are happening, having immigration running people's identities on the res.
Yeah,
You know what I
that
mean?
was crazy.
ICE setting up checkpoints of the Navajo Nation type stuff. Like, it's all of this, like, hyper criminalization that's happening to folks. And it's scary, man. It's scary for, me, for my kids. Like, this isn't like a society that I want my kids growing up in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Even about about my grandkids. I get like that with my grandkids. I'm like, damn, like, what is it going to be like, with
Hmm.
them, and it's just scary all the way around.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do with the collaborative, right? Is like bring folks together. These are all experts in the field, and really investing in our young leaders about like what is possible, right? There's a James Baldwin quote where he says like I've never been in despair because I can't let my nieces and my nephews see me in despair. And what do I
Wow.
tell them? What do I tell them? Right? I can't let them see me be hopeless. I can't let my
I have to
kids.
write that one
I
down.
can't let my kids see me be hopeless.
Right.
And
Right.
so how do we invest in our young people in real ways
Right.
and like straight up money, like how do we get money into the hands of young people, into young entrepreneurs, people who
Right.
want to do things in their community? How do we invest in young people? How do we invest in women? How do we invest in marginalized folks and really build those things that we want to see in our communities?
Right.
You know what I mean? How do we get young people those opportunities? How do we put young people, young leaders at the forefront?
Right.
Because it's really these guys who have the answers. Like I'm an old guy now, you know what I mean? That's why I made them come
Yeah.
with me because I'm looking at both of these dudes like, yo, you guys are the ones who are gonna take us to the next peaks.
Yeah.
I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm an old man now. Um,
Yeah.
so how are we investing in young people? And right now we're just not. Like straight up as a community, as a society, as a state, as a city, like we're not investing in our young folks.
I know, and you think about like going back to all the negativity on like social media platforms. Like you think if these people, instead of being negative, would turn that into a positive and contribute to our community, contribute to our youth, like how much better would that be for our city, right? For our state,
Yeah.
for that matter.
I think care, like genuine care, love, and support goes such a long way, especially for young men. Um, and I said all the time, like my dad didn't hug me until I was 18, and like that kind of thing messes with your head because like I have a son, he's 1 year old, and I'm like I hug him all the time. So like the fact that I grew up with that, and then you see like the way people treat you when you haven't really done anything wrong.
Right.
I haven't really done anything wrong. I'm just growing up and trying to figure it out the same way everyone else did, just with less resources. And you don't really want to like care to see that. It's gonna make people angry, and it's gonna cause a reaction out of them. And I had a lot of reactions. I was a very young kid. Got kicked out of schools all the time from Carlsbad, New Mexico, Las Cruces, New Mexico, and Albuquerque. I got expelled in every city. And because I was just angry that nobody loved me. Nobody wanted to fucking give me a hug. No one wanted to tell me, hey, what happened to you to
Right.
make you upset in the first place?
Right. You weren't
Nobody
seen
asked.
or
Yeah,
heard.
nobody asked me that question ever. They're
Right.
just like, oh, you did something bad, so now you got to go away now. Now I'm kicking you out the house. Now you have to do something different. You know what I'm saying? And then it's just like, how can I even want to do anything for anyone else? How can I want to be a productive member of society when society has shown me that you don't matter
Right.
because you're a fucking guy? You just got to
That
get over it.
my son actually went through that a lot, and I shared this before in another podcast, but when he was in middle school, he was assaulted by a teacher sexually. Him and some of his friends. It started off with porn and then turned into sexual things later. But I feel that, and he didn't share this with me until now, but he, he said that a lot of what he did when he was a teenager was taking his power back because he said he felt powerless,
Yeah.
you know, as a kid in middle school. And that he said at first we thought it was kind of cool because she was showing, and it was a female teacher. She was showing us porn, and we thought, oh, wow, she's showing us porn. As young boys, they're like, their mind's somewhere else.
Yeah.
He said, but when it started going to other places, he said, that's when I started like freaking out. And he said, and I didn't know how to like get out of it. And I just felt powerless.
It's like how Rodrigo said, like the adult world is crumbling all around these kids and they don't know what to do. So they're like, how can I take control of something? Because I don't have control of anything right now. And you feel control, you feel power. Honestly, when you get a gun, That gun is gonna make you feel like fucking Superman. Nothing is gonna happen to me. No one's gonna hurt me anymore. No one's gonna look at me crazy, feel like they can treat me lesser than them because I have this. And like the like real root cause is fear. Fear is like the main thing and why the majority of people go and get a gun in the first place, because I feel like I need this to protect myself because somebody bigger than me is threatening me and making me feel really uncomfortable, and there's no one to protect me. There's no one to protect me, so I have to protect myself, and this I know is going to protect me.
Right. Right. Because I mean that, and that's exactly what my son went through. You know, he got into guns, like gun crazy. I mean, for a whole, geez, I think 16, the whole 2.5 years, he was out there running around with, with guns. And the day that he got, the day that he turned himself in, the next day, the Albuquerque Journal put his picture on the front page and said, Cold Stone Killer caught. And of course, he's taking a mug shot. He's not going to be like, and they just put this like mug shot of him. And I look at him and I'm like, people look at him and probably think like, oh my God, look at him. He looks crazy. He is a crazy kid. Thank God he's off the streets. Or, when they really don't know that my kid is like such a gentle, amazing human being. Even in the case that he was convicted on, somebody passed away. And, regardless, my heart goes out to the mother of that child, but also like my son, I love my son unconditionally, and I'm going to walk with him through the next 6 years because that's still what he has, and I'm not giving up on him. I'm not going to give up on my son. And that's why I try to, contribute what I can, even to the community, and younger kids, especially younger girls. That's always been a thing for me, is investing in younger girls. I was involved in organized religion for many years, like almost 15 years. And I did a lot of ministry. I did prison ministry. And I used to go into the D home with my ex-father-in-law. And it was always my heart to work with, the younger girls, just because I wanted to share, where I was and let them know that, what, you are, people do care about you. You are loved regardless, and even now into my adulthood, I always open my home. If any of like Josiah's friends that he went to high school with, or my son's friends that he went to high school with, or if somebody that I know, has a friend or a family member that needs somewhere to stay, I open my home to them, because I just feel that they have to feel that love. They get enough hate from the world, like you said. So we definitely have to invest in them, you know. So what do you feel, Rodrigo, are the main factors? I know that you shared a little bit with us already, but what do you feel are the main factors that lead young people to commit crimes?
There's a lot, but like I said, in this town, it's literally access to money and opportunity. Um, it's the poorest state in the country, but you're surrounded by, media images, and, you know, folks are hungry, and hungry folks are desperate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you don't, like I said, you don't just wake up one day and you're like, oh, I'm gonna be a criminal. Like, oh, I'm gonna sell drugs. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I never did. Anyways, I woke up and I was like, yo, I'm fucking hungry, and we have bills to pay, and we have shit we need to handle. So if I can't get a straight job, I'm gonna get it however I need to get it.
Right.
And that leads to these other places. Well, now I need to feel safe, so now we need guns.
Yep.
And now we're outnumbered, so now there needs to be more of us. You know what I mean? And it becomes this kind of cycle that perpetuates,
Right.
right? And so when I was a young person, I was 18 or something, 17, because I was still on juvenile probation, and I got sent to Southwest Organizing Project. And it was the folks over there who were like, yo, because I was also doing like kind of moonlighting as an activist and going to marches and doing stuff. And I went to a school in Denver called the Escuela Tlatelolco, which was like a Chicano centric school that taught me about my culture and taught me about my history.
Oh, cool.
And, and that stuff's cool, but that stuff doesn't pay the bills.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's like, it doesn't like I said, it just doesn't pay the bills. It's
Right.
cool, and it like makes you feel good and stuff, but then you still got to go home, and home is still desperate.
Right.
And when I really found community at SWAP. Folks who were like, yo, this dude is smart. Let's
Right.
give him a job. Let's
Right.
give him an internship. And they were also folks who were willing to walk with me, like you were just saying, right? Like I fucked up constantly
Yeah.
when I was an intern at Swap as a young person. You know, I got a DWI in the Swap work truck one time, and they didn't give up on me. You know what I mean? Um,
But we have to fuck up to learn, I feel.
yeah,
It's a
for
learning
sure, for
process.
sure. This guy was talking about that earlier on his social media. Like, there, Victor has a dope social media presence. He's always giving motivational speeches. That's why I love this kid. But there, you know, that's part of the journey of life. And that I found a community of folks who was like, yeah, you know what? Shit's not perfect.
Hmm.
We're all imperfect humans. We're all
Right.
learning. And the same thing at La Placita, like they'll walk with you. You know what I mean? I can't change your life, but I will walk with you wherever, bro. Like I'll go
Yeah.
with you to court and I'll be there after court. You know what I mean? And you can call us at any time and we'll back you up no matter what. And I feel like that's what I learned that helped me eventually break that cycle. You know what I mean? And like I said, I was on and off probation till I was in my 20s. So really till my daughter showed up. And I was like, okay, I need to like figure my shit out because now I have this little girl who I need to take care of. And it was really that community of folks who were like, this person is worth investing in. And we
Yeah.
believe in this kid. And so then they, you know, piece by piece, okay, let's send him here. Okay, he's interested in this. Like, go over there and go learn about that. You know what I mean? Go learn from people who are already doing that work and
Right.
bring it back and let us know what's up. Tell us how we can do better. Tell our community how we can do better. You know what I mean? And you get to stand on the shoulders of giants in your community and then bring that back and then pay it forward and bring your young folks with you.
Right.
Invest in them in real ways, which is what we're trying to do now with the collaborative, right? Is like we have some resources, we have some best knowledge or some best practices and some knowledge and some expertise. But really, I'm not an expert at being 28 no more or being 25 or 17. You know what I mean? It's the young folks who are the experts in that experience right
Yeah.
now. And they're the ones who we want to be investing in. You know what I mean? And whether it's skateboarding or music or making movies or whatever it is that young folks are interested in right now, um, it's really what we're trying to double down on. Is like, what are young people? What are the things that young people are passionate about?
Having a space for them.
And how do we create
Right.
space for them? And how do we walk with them no matter what?
Yeah.
No matter what you did, I'm gonna walk
Right.
with you. You know what I mean? And no matter what where you're going, we're here. We're a resource, and we got your back. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And a lot of people just don't have that at all in their families, in their school day, in their regular life. So if nothing else, I think that's what we can provide.
Yes.
You know what I mean? As
That support.
advocates, as activists, as community people, like I know we're broke too. You know what I mean? We're struggling. We're all in the struggle, bro. Like
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm living paycheck to paycheck still. You know what I mean? But
Well,
like,
hey, I'm the same way. People used to think like, "Oh yeah, you own a shop, like you must have a lot of money." I'm like, "Shit, it's a whole other way around." Like when you have your own business, your money's constantly turning and you're constantly investing in your business,
yep, yep,
I mean, yeah, of course you make a little bit of money, but I mean, I wasn't, I still had another job.
right,
I've been at a salon. I managed a salon for 21 years and I'm still there. And I was still working there when I had my shop, and I worked at my shop and the salon,
hmm
at the
hmm
same time. So, yeah, I feel you on
yeah. No,
that.
it's not. It's hard work for real. You know what I mean? It's not
Right.
work that none of us are. We're never gonna be rich doing this kind of stuff. But
Right.
I know that I got a whole community of folks who will walk with me the same way I'm walking with them.
Yes. Yeah. It's the fulfilling, it's just so fulfilling to invest in somebody's life or to make somebody feel like, damn, I am loved, or, I am accepted. And I actually, during the pandemic, had one of Josiah's friends live with me. And, I just invested in her. And she came from a home where, her mom was a meth addict and they lived from motel to hotel. And, she never just had like that, she wasn't like in a grounded place. She didn't have that security. And for the whole like 8 months that she lived with me, I we would go to like Target and stand in line because that's when they were only letting like 3 people in at a
Mm.
time. And then when stuff started opening up again, like I would take her to eat, or I would talk to her about this, I would talk to her about that. And now she's just, I look at her and she's so successful. and successful at being a human being. Success doesn't mean like, oh, I make all this money and I have this, fabulous job. That's, I mean, yeah, that's success. But watching her be a successful human being at the age that she's at right now makes me feel good, because she'll always tell me, like, Kim, if it wasn't for you, like, loving me and helping me to build up my self-worth, she
Mm-hmm.
said, I wouldn't be here. I would
Mm-hmm.
still, be down there where I shouldn't have been, running around with my son and everybody else. But, I just think it's awesome that what you guys do, and the investment that you make in the community and in our children. It's
Yeah.
just, I
I
love
get
it.
paid to help my community, and I got a job where I can go to my kids' baseball games, and that's
Mm,
success to me. You
Right,
know,
that's
right.
rich.
Yeah.
That's being
That's the way I
rich.
that's
feel
it
about
for
Yeah.
like
me.
my grandkids. I pick them up on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And to me, it's like, that's an investment for me, because I was a single mom. So, and then when I opened my shop and I was working at the salon, like my kids were latchkey kids, you know what I mean? They were home a
Hmm.
lot alone. But I was trying to make a life, because I wanted to give them a good life. And, it's hard. It's hard, especially a single family home.
Hmm.
You talked about that yourself,
Hmm.
coming from that. And people don't realize that. So, shout out to single parents, because it's
Yeah,
Shout out
for
to single
hard.
sure.
parents.
Shout out to my mama for sure,
Yeah.
because we put that lady through a lot. And
Yeah.
she was one of those moms who walked with us wherever we wanted to go, whatever we needed.
Yeah.
And through incarceration and court dates and all of it, she
Yeah.
was always she was always with it. So
That's how I am with Josiah. I was telling somebody the other day that him being incarcerated, honestly, it's like taking care of another household. You know what I mean? Like, I send him money for commissary. I send him put money on the tablet so he can call, or so he can text, or so he can watch movies on the
Yeah.
tablet. You know what I mean? Because he's in solitary confinement right now. So it's
Mm.
like, I want him to read, but I also don't want his mind too much, because he has anxiety already. So being in that little box, you know what I mean, for
hmm
23
hmm
hours a day, it's like, I'm like, okay, I'll do whatever I have to do, to bring him some peace. You know, I mean, there's not much peace that you could find in there, but just a glimpse of hope.
Yeah. Me
You
and my
know,
brother were talking about that because he was locked up during COVID too, and it was literally on Easter. It was a little Easter party, and older brothers, they get drunk and put their arm around your shoulder and start talking to you about how much they love you and things like that. And he's like, just the fact that you'd pick up my phone every time I would call. You know what I'm saying? Like, people don't realize like how much that does for someone, and like it could be seen as an inconvenience when like they're just calling you all the time, but there's nothing else to do in there. They have nothing else to do, so like it's not too much to just answer the call and talk to them for 15 minutes. You know what I'm saying? And like sometimes I'd be like, hey, what are you doing? When he would answer the call, but he's like, what the fuck can I be doing? You know what I'm saying? I'm
yeah,
in,
that's
I'm
what
in jail.
Josiah
Right,
says.
I
yeah.
So,
can't be doing
yeah,
shit.
Yeah, that's what Load tell
But
time. So I'm just in jail.
yeah,
but it's
You
just
doing?
like but like now he's like a plumber making like a good amount of money living in Bernalillo and doing all these
that's
things, and he's like,
awesome.
um because you like answer those phone calls, it made me like just didn't forget and were like there for me. It's like a motivational boost to
Right,
continue to do what I'm doing now, because you made me feel like I could still just by answering my phone.
right.
You know what I'm saying? And so like things like that care and support, like we were talking about earlier, goes such a long way that people don't realize the smallest things can do for somebody.
And what's encouraging too is that, all of us that are sitting at this table, because I was sharing with Victor and Chewy that, when I was a teenager, I was a chola back in the 80s, right? And, we were doing drive-bys or getting shot at, and, all that kind of stuff. And not that I'm glorifying that, but what I want to say with all that is that people like us who have like walked that walk, I feel like we really can reach kids in a big way, because they look at you and they think like, wow, like if they could do it. Because like I look at you and I'm listening to you talk, and I've listened to you talk before, and I remember sitting there thinking like, damn, because I'm really like into vocabulary. I like to like learn new words all the time. And when I've listened to you talk, and even you, Chewy, at Millions for Prisoners, I remember thinking like, damn, they got a good vocabulary. You guys are just really well spoken, and I just think that that's so awesome. you
Yeah, I
know.
copy a lot of Rodrigo says. I try to just remember what he told me, and I'm just like, yep, that's it, that's it. So, anything I say, like Rodrigo's he's my media source. So he's the fact checker. I'd be like, yo, is this true? Is this how this really happened? And he lets me know. And so, but it's like that like we call it like the leadership ladder. You know what I'm saying? So he's like, people invested in him, and then he invested in me. I'm like, when I was 19 is when we first met. I'm 24 right now, and so like that 5 years of investment, from like starting by, like, we joke about all the time, getting paid in chicken wings and food for doing the work. He's like, I can't get you a job, but I can feed you. You know what I'm
I could
saying?
get you some Dion's.
You know what I'm saying? It was mostly Wingstop.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of chicken
a lot of chicken
wings.
wings, man. That's,
Yeah.
that's how
We
we
didn't
made
have a
it.
lot of money to do this kind of work, and
Yeah.
now we built up these programs, and we have
Oh, so it
grants
hasn't
coming
always been
in.
like this?
No.
No, and it wasn't.
Oh,
In fact,
wow.
it wasn't really like popular work. Folks didn't. They don't want to work with the bad kids. People want to work
Yeah.
with the good kids, the kids who are already doing leadership stuff or
Right.
student council or whatever. You know what I mean? They don't want to work with the gang members or the delinquents,
Yeah.
especially kids who have charges. A lot
Right.
of programs won't let you come in if you're on probation.
Right.
So we were like the opposite. Those are the kids we want to be working with because those are the kids who we see ourselves in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I remember being there, and I remember like not having a lot of options and having community folks be like, "No, come on, bro, let's go do whatever." And one of the things we try to do is teach young folks how to dream.
Uh-huh.
We don't get to dream in the hood. It's one of the things
Right.
that they take from us, right? Is like
Yeah.
our ability to dream, our ability to think big, like, and that's one thing I've taught, a lot of the young folks, but I had to teach myself that too. Is like we could do almost anything. You want to own a skateboard company, we got you. You want to do music, we got you.
Right.
You know what I mean? You want to get into Netflix, we got you. We'll figure out how to do it. You know what I
Right.
mean? And we could dream big, and we can we can accomplish those dreams.
You're absolutely right because I remember being young. I remember being I already had my daughter. I had her at the age of 20. And I remember I was probably like maybe 25, 26. And I remember one of my friends buying a house. And I said, wow, that's amazing, but I'll never do anything like that. I'll never buy a house. That's not in the cards for me. And I finally bought my first home 6 years ago. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm super proud of myself for that because I did it as a single mom.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and it's not easy having a mortgage, but
Can imagine.
it's just it's an investment and it's something for my children.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I'm really proud of for sure. What do you feel? What role does peer pressure play in youth criminal behavior?
I think that's probably the single most. I don't know. It's interesting. I think insecurity is more of a problem for our youth than anything. If you're not confident in yourself, or you don't love yourself, or nobody taught you to love yourself, you're gonna find a lot of problems going down that road. Not having nice clothes, maybe being overweight, coming from the wrong side of the tracks or what have you. And if you're not taught to be proud about any of those things, whatever it may be, like I was taught to be proud of my brown skin and never hide my braids and never back down from any of that. And so that allowed me to kind of excel or succeed in some ways and kind of get through some of that, navigate that world. But I think insecurity much more than peer pressure. I don't think people can actually persuade you to do something. I think it's already in your head that you're going to do it, but it's because you felt insecure about it.
And you're absolutely right because I have a story. When I was a teenager, I had a friend that lived up here in the Heights. I lived on the west side, like Unser and Bridge area. That's where I grew up. And I remember going to her house with her and her telling me, don't tell my mom that you live across the river. And that shit really impacted me. Like literally, like I internalized that and thought, God, am I like a fucked up person because I live across the river? So you're right about that because that left a scar, that left a wound in me. It made me think like, oh, we're just shitty because we live on that side. We don't live on this side, right? So you're right. Insecurity does play a huge role in that. Because I remember going through having insecurities and not, feeling, confident in myself or about, my accomplishments. Because I struggled in school too. Academically, I struggled because I couldn't focus. So I just remember, when I would like they would say, raise your hand if you have an answer, and I know I knew the answer, but I was scared to raise my hand because I was embarrassed. I wasn't secure enough to like, want to say what the answer is, and then what if I'm wrong, or what if I'm rejected? And then somebody would raise their hand and say the answer, and I'm like, oh man, I should have said it,
Yeah.
But I probably would say that it wasn't until my late, till my mid 30s that I started to really walk in my power. And ever since then, I just am, it's just like nonstop after that. I was like, I'm never going to let anybody make me feel any less than what I am. I'm not going to let anybody demean me. I'm not going to let anybody, make me feel like I'm not worthy, because I am worthy. And it wasn't until my mid 30s that that started building up for me. I didn't have access to that. I didn't know what self-love was, self-worth. I knew that it was out there, but I didn't think it was for me. I'm like, oh, well, that person grew up and they have money, so that's why they're like that. It's always surrounded around like money, vanity. You think that because when you're younger, I feel like you think that that's what success is, right? And like my friends in high school, like they drove to school. My mom dropped me off, so I was like, God, I wish I had a car, you know. It's just,
Yeah, I would make my mom drop me off around the corner because we had an old beat up Chrysler, and I'd be like, "Just leave me here,
yeah.
so I can walk up, and pretend I walked to school."
Oh man.
But no, you can't influence people or manipulate people who know who they are,
Right.
who are confident
Right.
in themselves,
Yeah.
who believe in themselves, and that's one of the things that, like Chewy said, like it's not something that you're necessarily taught. You know what I mean? And
Right.
for a bunch of different reasons, but you get to that point where you're like, oh, okay. And it's like that self-realization, self-actualization, because you can't make someone believe in themselves. You can try to lift them up and you can love them up and stuff.
Yeah.
But, for folks who don't have that, who didn't grow up like that, like those are folks who are easily influenced and easily manipulated and peer
Right.
pressured into doing stuff.
Right.
You know, I was sort of the same way. My mom was always like, you're like, your culture is this and this is who you are, and like my mom loved us up in a way
Yeah.
that was like, and maybe a little too much, because then we were like bad influences on other people in our lives, but now we're trying to be good influences on people, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up the same way. Like my mom and dad, they were very loving. But I also hung out with a group of kids that their parents were dope dealers. So they always had like the best of everything, right? And we'd go to the mall and they'd take like $100, and $100 back then when I was a teenager in the late 80s, that's a lot of money, right? My mom would give me like $3, to like get something to eat and drink. And I'm like, God, they get to shop and do all that stuff and I don't get to do that. So I felt angry at my mom and dad, because I felt like, well, shit, my friends that I hang out with, they get money to go to the mall and I don't.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a trip the way things happen, especially when you're young, and the way that you view life, the lens that you view life out of.
I think that's real. I think one thing that I wanted to that you brought up is like you dated the dope dealer, right? Or like whatever that may have been.
Yeah.
Like that was my biggest motivation to be super thug, as I said earlier. I wanted the girls who looked a certain type of way, had that and there was one beautiful woman that it sticks out in my mind. And I did her boyfriends. I knew who her boyfriends were. They were the shooters. They were the dope dealers. They had
Right.
the candy painted cars on blades and da 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 da. And so that's what I wanted to be. So every step I took in my life as I became a young man, I wanted to be like that. I wanted to have the stripes. I wanted to do all of that
Right.
because I wanted the girl. And the girls weren't looking at me because I had straight A's. The girls weren't looking at me because I was, good at school. They weren't looking at none of that. They were looking at the dudes who had money, who had the financial status, or that could show the financial status at
Right.
least. Now I know that ain't real.
No.
They ain't got no type of money.
Hey, it just took one time for me to go to the D home getting caught with gun and cocaine, and then I was like, yeah, I got to change my life.
But I think that's all, like talking about peer pressure. A lot of our young men are so insecure that they're trying to chase these women. And I think that's where it starts too. If the women start to say, well, no, we don't want that. I don't know if y'all have ever seen that Spike Lee movie, Chirac, where the premise of the story is all these gang members are killing each other. And then the women finally decide to stop having sexual relations with these men, and that's what changes the narrative to the city. And because the women have the power, and I full-heartedly believe that. I was raised by a single mother as well, and so, like, I have the most utmost respect for women in general, where I try to, as I move forward as a young man. But I think that's where it comes from. If the women chose, didn't choose the dope dealers,
Yep.
Maybe us young men wouldn't try to be hard, try to be thugs, try to be etc.
Right. Right. No, you're absolutely right about that. You're absolutely right. But I also think it's just so like glorified, right? And you think like, oh, okay, well, I want to be like that, or I want to do that, or I want to ride in that car, or I want to, I wish that the young me, I wish I would have been into the guy that made the straight A's. You know what I mean? I do. Honestly, I really do. And even, as I got older, when I was like in my late 30s, I was 37 years old to be exact, but I dated a physicist. And
They got real money too.
hey,
Like,
no, but he
Sandy,
had
a lab
no, but
scientist.
he just graduated from UNM at that time, but
It was
he was a
there
little bit
yet.
younger than me. But
That's
you know,
okay. That's okay. You winning. That's okay.
You're seeing the future. You know what I'm saying?
Invest in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
community. He gonna change the world.
Invest
You
in
gonna help him.
youth.
Yeah, but yeah, that didn't work out too good because I just felt like, yeah, this isn't. I don't know. It just was. It was too hard because I just had a different mentality than he did, right? And he would just say things like, "Oh yeah, Kim, you're so street smart. You're not book smart, but you're street smart." And when he told me that, I was like, "Fuck you," And I know I didn't. That was it. That was my whole experience with my
Those are-
physicist.
Those microaggressions.
Yeah.
Progressions.
Microaggressions are so real, especially when you like do stop doing that shit anymore and come to these new spaces. I'm guilty of it too, like just being blind to the fact that somebody can be different from what you think they are.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so that also can kind of deter you from continuing on the path of doing something good, because you do get into these rooms with a lot of smart people, and then you're just like, oh fuck, these guys think super less of me. Am I gonna let that get to me? Am I gonna, people, how secure am I in doing what I'm doing right now? You know what I'm saying? And I've been very insecure for even to this day. I'm still insecure with a lot of things I do, but I know that like I may be insecure right now, but I'm gonna be even more insecure if I walk away.
Exactly.
So I have to just be still.
Right. Right.
know?
That's how I felt when I joined the board back in August, the MDC Oversight Board. And I thought to myself, oh my God, like they asked me to be on there. I'm like, I don't even know what the hell to like do on a board. I've never even been on a board, right? So the first time I go to the board meeting, the guy turns to me, Mr. Chair turns to me and he says, Kim, can you adjourn the meeting? And I'm like, what? I didn't know what any of that meant. And I went home and I was like, this is not for you. You do not need to do this. And I'm like, really, Kim? I had to like self-talk, right? I had to pump myself up and say, this is how you learn.
Yeah.
This is how you learn. You're going to go back and you're going to do it. And, I'm still there. And I just got signed up for 4 years. So I'm excited about
yeah,
that
that's dope.
because I've been able to bring, lots of families to the board meetings who have had problems with MDC. So that's been really exciting for me,
Yeah.
to
No, I've been at SWAP for 20 years, roughly, since I was a 16, 17-year-old kid. And we've never had the warden of MDC show up at the office for a meeting. And, like, he was there. He sat in his car because the moms weren't finished talking yet. And he, like, waited. And I was telling George, I was like, the moms have the juice right now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they can get shit done. They're making shit happen. The warden's out there sitting in his car waiting for us, bro. But that's, I tell Chewy all the time, all we have is our authenticity.
right,
That's what we bring.
right,
And that's why people like us too, right? Like we come in and we're just who we are. We're both high school dropouts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But we're like, we're people who have a lot of experience and we are experts in that experience.
Right.
In our lives, in our communities, in the people that have invested in us. And that's what we bring to the table. We bring authenticity. We bring we talk a little bit of shit. You know what I mean? We crack jokes. We're like, that's our currency. Like we don't
Right.
have degrees. We don't have fancy expertises or research or anything in our pocket. Like we're just dudes who care.
Yeah.
who like walked a path and are now trying to do better and trying to bring our communities with us.
Right.
And that like at first it gets us in the door in a lot of spaces, and second like it's that opportunity once you're in the door to make change.
Right.
Right? To hold the door open and get everybody else in and say, "Yo, come on, let's do it." But having the warden come down to the swap offices was like one of those aha moments for me, where I was like, "Okay, these moms are for cereal. Like they're ready to do some shit. So we have to back that up."
Right. Well, I appreciate that, Rodrigo, because I literally like think, every time I sit in a meeting with Warden Smith, I just know, and even from like my son's uncle who is currently incarcerated in there right now, he told me himself, he's like, and he's been to prison, he's been, I mean, through the system for years. And he said, you know what? I've never, ever been locked up where a warden comes into the pod and treats me like a human being and says, "Good morning. How are you doing today?" He said, and that's the way he is. And, and yeah, there's some things that I don't agree with
Right.
when we talk about at the board
Right.
meeting, but a lot of stuff I'm like, you know what? He is making a difference. And it's sad to me, if I'm honest, it's sad to me that it took somebody from out of state, from Florida, to come in here and treat our people better than our own people from our own city treated him.
Yeah. No, like I said, just even sitting in the room and being willing to listen to the families is more than I've ever seen from anybody at MDC.
Right.
Any of the wardens or lieutenants or anybody. You know what I mean? I've never seen them come up off the hill down into the community and come sit in the offices downtown. Like,
Yeah.
and whether or not, I've heard people mixed opinions about the dude. Some people
Right.
think he's full of shit and some people think that he's trying or whatever. But
Right.
that to me was like, okay. And to me, it really spoke more to the power of the moms and the families. That y'all could get him to come down to the community and actually listen to folks.
Right.
But my daughter always, because I love my kid, and I know everyone thinks their kids are special, but Juanita's like a really special little kid. We're talking about how you do hard things, and she goes, "Well, how do you eat an elephant, Dad?" And I was like, "I don't know. I've never eaten an elephant. One bite at a time, right? You have to start somewhere. You got to do." If it's little pieces, like a little bite first,
Right.
and then eventually, then we're sitting down and we're eating an elephant, and we're doing this thing
Also,
that we all thought
don't
was
eat
impossible.
elephants. It's probably illegal.
Ooh, elephants are probably an endangered species, and you're not supposed to eat them. But if you had to eat an elephant,
This
you know
is
what
how
I
you
mean?
do
Like,
it.
how would you do it? And I was like, I don't know. One
Wow,
bite at a
that's so
time,
cute.
right? One bite at a time.
That's super.
So I don't know where she picked that up or what, but that was like another one of those.
Okay, well, the
aha
apple
moments
doesn't
for
fall
me.
far from the tree.
Like, oh, you're right. Why didn't I think of that? Like, yeah, you're right. We have to start somewhere, and sometimes it has to be small,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? And if it's just this one bite, then we're gonna take this one bite and we're gonna start.
Right.
Fact.
Right. So, Rodrigo, what type of programs does La Placita offer our youth here in our city?
Chewy,
I
you've been
think
there longer than me.
yeah. So I've been going to La Placita since I was 15, and I started going to their garden because I'd get kicked out of school, and me and my dad, he was with my stepmom, and she's a professor at UNM, so she really cares about school. So if I wasn't at school, we couldn't let her know. So to hide me, he would take me to work with him because he worked at La Placita. So I started going to the garden, and Eric, who was in charge of the YRC program, which is the Youth Reporting Center. I don't know what it's called now.
Resiliency Center.
Youth Resilience Center. That's what they call it now. It's like he gets referrals from either probation or sometimes schools.
It's basically part of the community corrections program.
Yeah.
So if you're on probation, parole, ankle monitor, you can go to La Placita during the day.
Oh, okay.
9 to 5, and like we would do music, we would do art, we would do acupuncture, and sometimes Eric would just kind of take us into the community and things like that. And through that, there's like therapy involved. So Eric, he's kind of like the case manager, so he just gets these youth all these resources that they need, and kind of really is an advocate for them and builds up kind of their resume. So if they're facing a charge when they go in front of the judge, Eric's standing behind them to be like, well, like this youth has been doing all these programs and being involved in his community in this way. So like, don't just throw him in jail because he's doing a lot more than what you think he's done right now. So that was like the big thing. Then we have TMAC, which was Thugs Making a Change. It's now Teens Making Change every Wednesday, 5:30 to 7:30. Food's always provided. And it's just a group for young men, actually men of all ages, but primarily young men, to come together and talk. We have a rose and highs and lows. Call them highs and lows. So you talk about your low for the week, something that just kind of made you not feel the best, and then you end it with something that made you feel good, which is the high. And we always want to end on the high note. So we have you say your lows first, kind of talk about what brought you down, and then you end it on like what's picking you up and like the reason why you're going to keep going, and things like that. And then we do have a sweat lodge every Thursday as well. Art on the weekends, 12 to 3. And then like pathways too, pathways navigation. That's what Pablo does. That's my dad. So he gets a bunch of resources
The one
too.
with the long hair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so he gets a bunch of resources, can help you with your light bill, help you with your and utilities, things like that, clothing,
Clothing.
yeah, everything,
Yeah.
everything you might need. So it's like it's multi generational. You know what I'm saying? It's not just for youth. So if a youth comes in and it's like, well, I'm living with my grandma and she's the one that needs that assistance, then we're gonna help your granny out. You know what I'm saying? And that kind of makes the youth feel like good and want to keep coming back because they're like, well, like I know my home is being taken care of right now, so I can kind of invest in myself at this moment and focus on myself and getting better because I'm not having to worry about what's going on with my grandma and taking care of her because I know these guys are helping me do that.
Wow.
And so things like that kind of work.
I didn't know that you guys had all those programs.
Yeah,
That's
it's
so
a
cool.
multi-services like agency that
Yeah.
covers a lot of ground. They also hold down a lot of cultural spaces. We have curanderos that come through. One of the like catchphrases or things we believe in, not just the catchphrases, like the la cultura cura, right? Like connecting with your
Cura.
culture is what can cure folks, and that's
The missing link.
right, and connecting folks.
And what is that?
La
What is that?
cultura cura is like the
Culture cure.
culture cures,
Yeah, that's what
basically
it
in
translates
English.
to.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But connecting folks to their culture, to indigenous healing, to ceremony, to Chicano culture, and really like grounding folks and helping them find their way back home. You know what I mean? Back to their culture.
Right. So what do you guys see as far as like, I guess I want to use success rate when with the teens? Like, do they respond really well to the programs there?
I mean,
I started La Placita in January, so
yeah.
I've seen some young people come through, and I know that I have a lot of homies that have gone through there. My brother worked there, my cousin worked there, so it is for me like a second home. You know what I
Right,
mean? Like
right.
it's a place where I found another extended family and folks who I love and work that I love, and I know that there's moments where we also are an organization just like Southwest Organizing Project where I worked for so long that we hold down political space for our communities, and part of that is being like truth tellers and speaking truth to power, and being able to like talk shit to the governor
Right.
and communicate our community's needs to elected officials and hold elected officials accountable is a big part of our work too.
I love that.
And so really for me, and I'll let Chewy finish, but for me this is like it's the young people that they need to be hearing from,
Right.
because I'll be up there and they're at this point like tired of hearing from me kind of thing. But who they really need to be hearing from is young people who are in the things that they're talking about. It's
Right.
young people who are going through those systems that are the ones who should have the loudest voice, the ones who should have the most agency in making that change.
Right.
And so that's the kind of work I'm trying to do as building up the community organizing at La Placita, is really getting young folks and teaching young people how to advocate for themselves, how to advocate for them communities, and how to like transform their communities while they're transforming themselves.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
As far as the success, I guess it goes like on how you base it out of. One thing I've noticed since being there for 10 years is I've always seen people come back. So like the program is only 30 days. 30 days you complete it, and you can choose to like still come to the meetings on Wednesdays for the TMAC, or you can just go on about your business and things like that. But like even for me, I left La Placita to go work for an organization called Centro Savila, and I was a peer support worker. And then that's when I went to go work with Rodrigo at SWAP. where we started the Youth Justice Coalition, and went through all these things and even bumped heads with Albino, who's the director of La Placita. You know what I'm saying? Hear me like a little 20-year-old kid bumping heads with this 60-year-old man, like for like over stupid stuff that we're just so passionate about. We're not hearing what the other person's saying,
Right.
and to go to that, to still being welcomed back and knowing that like no matter who or what like goes down, I know I can go back there.
Right.
And there's other youth that do it, and Chris is one of them too. He went when he was 15. He left, but then he came back because he knew if he needed it, that place was going to have the resource for him.
Right.
And so me and him got hired back on during the Barrio Youth Corps at the same time. And we also, through La Placita in 2020, before the pandemic started, um, we were part of this like workshop too that La Placita did with Danny Casey, and they have like in their blue building they have pictures posted on their walls and things like that, and you can see 15-year-old Chris and 19-year-old me in this little program that they're doing. To like now we work there. Now me and Chris.
They're both dads.
Yeah,
They're
now we're both
like,
dads.
They're both old guys.
And like going to Santa Fe to the legislative session and talking, and Chris is really passionate about, he hands out foods on Fridays. You know what I'm saying? We all like assist and things like that, but he goes and picks it up from Costco, goes back to La Placita, gets the boxes ready to hand out to all the folks in the South Valley. You know what I'm saying? And like he just remembered it. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of people just remember, like, no matter what, I know, like, as long as La Placita's still there, I know they're going to know where to point me in the next direction, because we built that connection that's going to last forever. So that those 30 days, like, is usually all it takes for you just to never forget that, like, that place is always going to be your home. You're always going to be welcome. And, like it's not there for you to be that forever as well.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? La Placita isn't a place where you have to stay forever. They're there to help you get to that next level, reach your potential, and go further. It's like that leadership ladder that we're always talking about. So that's why I was.
They just had their 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
Back in December too. So, over those 20 years, thousands of people have come through the programs. Mm-hmm. And like you said, some people come back, some people leave, and then some people don't make it out. You know what I mean? We've lost a lot of folks over the years. To drugs, to violence, to the streets, to burke, to all of it. And you take the good with the bad.
Yeah.
But, where we're at now is, we're building up this kind of community organizing piece with the collaborative, really trying to do this like deep investment work. Chewy's running our youth group for the collaborative. Victor's been helping out a lot. And for me, that's like the success, right? Is like, I have these dope young folks who are, we're trying to invest what we can where we can, and then like see where they can take it. You know what I mean?
Right.
See where Chewy can take the youth group. See where Victor can take the skateboard company. You know what I mean? And those are the things ultimately, in my mind, that pay dividends. So in 10 years, when this dude's running for city council, or this dude's running for tribal council, or you know what I mean, where they're investing in young people and they're doing big things, to me, that's the success. You know what I mean? Where like, what is the next generation doing? And then where are they going to start investing in their young folks who they're already working with? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so awesome. Victor, tell us a little bit about your skateboarding company that you're building.
This dude does all kinds of stuff, not just the skate. He's like the hardest working man in Burke.
So Maze Skateboards is what it's called. Maize, Maize. A group of friends were from the Laguna Pueblo. We decided to, I forced them, I manipulated them, I guess. And, I always was interested in money. Again, the girl wanted the dope dealer, so I had to get money. But I learned that there's a little bit more to just hustling. You could figure out a legal way to do it. So I decided that I was going to, buy skateboards. And that's what happened. I found a group of like-minded individuals, and they were down to sell burritos with me at high school, and make enough cash to buy our first set of decks. And that's what we did. And 10 years later, that was when we were like 15, 16. Now we're all 25, 26. We got to see a lot of different things and skate all throughout the Southwest and do competitions and, ruffle a lot of feathers and just, touch the ground and just kind of claim our identities through skateboarding as Indigenous young men. And we got to see a lot of stuff, and that's kind of where it all began and where it started. And today we're a little bit less of like out there in the community skateboarding like that, but we are doing things like this and kind of leveling up our, involvement in the community in a different way as we age up as young men. And yeah, we've just been, we try to make cool things, and we try to like bring the kids out and try to have events where they can come and skate, have a safe space, because oftentimes the skate park can turn into a bad spot really
Yes.
quick. And I don't like to highlight all that stuff. That's why I have my events like early in the morning. I typically have them 9, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
My biggest vice other than women was coffee. So caffeine is where I get down. And so yeah, I definitely drink a lot of coffee. So I have these events based in coffee. So, we invite people out to come skateboard, and we bring coffee so that they're not like, oh, I had to get coffee, so I'm late, or what have you. And then we try to provide food and stuff like that. And I do that like once a month. And we go to different skate parks throughout the state, because I'm Indian. We try to go to those communities as well and
That's
touch base
awesome.
like all over. And yeah, that's just really what we do with the skateboards.
I think it's really cool that you go to different skate parks, because I really think that there needs to be like a big influence there at skate parks, just because I know, like, firsthand what happened with my son, and it all started at at a skate park. And I think that kids need people like you know, to set that example.
We try to, it's hard because, we're squares, we're lame, we're not the cool it thing. And it's all good, but, we're going to continue to show up, continue to invest regardless of how it feels, and people come back. And that's
Right.
the most important thing. Like,
And the seed is planted.
the seed is planted, maize.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, that's what we typically do. But we're based out of SWAP, or the Southwest Organizing Project.
Uh-huh.
That's where I met Rodrigo. Just kind of like we're doing our thing, making music, making skateboards, selling couches. We're just or the regime that I'm building is straight hustlers. That's
I love that.
just trying
I love
to
that.
financial freedom's our only hope.
They
Right.
own their own. They have a furniture company too. If you need any furniture, hit him up. They
That's
bought a
so
couch.
cool.
Call me at
Jeez.
505-506-0322. Hanu Furniture, HANU. Hanu means people in Western Karis.
Oh, I love that.
And that's kind of what we do. Trying to just change the game financially. They don't have to sell drugs. They could flip
Exactly. That is so awesome. That is so awesome. Just side note, I opened my shop with my tax return.
couches. There you go. There you go.
Oh yeah,
did.
that's smart though. Shit.
I did.
Shit,
I,
that is
I
what
opened
do.
my business with my tax return.
Good. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I advise everybody to do that. I advise that's what he was talking about. Fail. The sooner and the quicker you get used to failing,
Yep.
the easier things become, because that risk becomes lower and lower, because
Yeah.
you're able to learn from those mistakes, those failures, and not get stopped in the process. When the next thing comes, right? You might have not did as well as you thought you would in the business, but now here you're doing a podcast,
Right.
and this might be more successful, or maybe not. Then you try something else, but now you have all these lessons,
Right.
and you can see more of what's happening, and not just focus on, oh, it didn't make any money.
Right. Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I have something else I want to ask you real quick. I've been wanting to take, you were saying that you guys give out food on Fridays at La Placita.
Yep.
I've been wanting to take my grandsons to do stuff like that, because I really feel that they need to be exposed to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you guys like allow people to come in to help?
Anybody who's down to help.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
That's
that
awesome.
for sure. Like the gates are open like usually around 7:30. That's when kind of the parking lot starts to get full.
Uh-huh.
Food arrives like at 10 o'clock, and sometimes we just unload it right off the truck. Everyone's in the parking lot in a circle, and you just go to their trunks or to their back seat, and you're just putting food there. Russell, who's the programs manager, I think was the official title of La Placita, he's just yelling at you, and he's giving you all the direction you need to go wherever you need to go. And yeah, we're down for it. Like my nephew comes and help. He's 12. Rodrigo's daughter comes and helps all the time too. I've had my son with me. He's 1, but he watches and things like that. So literally anyone who's down to help and give that hand, we're always open to it.
I would
for
love
sure.
that for them.
Where
Honestly.
is La Placita?
831 East Leda Boulevard, Southwest 87105, next to Kathy's.
Kathy's
Awesome. And you know
Carryout.
what? My husband lived right there on Gatewood, and I moved into his house for a few years, and I used to pass by La Placita all the time, and I used to think, what is that? I thought it was a church for the longest time. I was like, what is La Placita? So then the first time I ever went to a meeting there, I was like, oh my God, this whole time, like, this is what it is. It's so amazing. Well, guys, before we close, I just want to ask you what you feel, what do we need to see in our city for our youth? What changes? I mean, I know there's probably a plethora of them, but
Yeah, there's a whole laundry list of things we could do better and should be doing better. I think for me, like I said earlier, like I love Albuquerque, even when it doesn't love me back. You know what I mean?
right,
But it's not a place that's like good right now. It's not a
right,
place where my kids are gonna thrive, and I want to change that sincerely. But I really feel like what we're onto with all of this, what the guys are talking about right here, is one of those things. Like, how are we investing in our young folks? How are we connecting young people to these opportunities to start their own businesses, to showcase their art, to tell their stories, to be their full authentic selves, to be able to support themselves and their families with their art, whether it's rapping or making beats or making music or making movies or making pottery or doing painting, like whatever that thing is that get, and even if it's just money, even if it's just hustling,
right.
you know what I mean? And if it's slinging coffee, if it's slinging furniture, if it's doing skateboards, you know how I knew this
I
dude was
love
for
that.
real is because during the pandemic they couldn't get skate decks, so they built their own skateboard press out of hydraulic jacks and concrete,
Oh my
and they just DIY'd it and started making their own
God.
skateboards.
Sick, dude.
And like, just to get it like that and just be like, fuck it, we're gonna get it however we can, and we're gonna make this happen. Because what if one day we're not able to order skateboards off of Amazon, and then
Right.
that day happened and they were like, well, fuck it, we actually know how to make our own decks.
Right.
You know
That
what I
is
mean?
so amazing. Hey,
Those are the kind
you
of
are the man. You are
yeah,
the
he's the
man.
hardest working dude in boot camp, man. For me what it is.
Right.
Investing in these young folks, investing in those opportunities for them, investing in that really creative, really like get it out the dirt, get it out the mud kind of spirit. And that's what we have here in Albuquerque. You know what I mean? And that,
Right.
there's not a lot of outlets for that. There's a lot of bad outlets for that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And folks fall into that and it's easy. You know what I mean? And money, like they say, easy come, easy go.
Right.
But how are we building up those other opportunities for folks to get it? And
Right.
we're on a path. I feel like with the collaborative, with La Placita, with Swap, you know what I mean. We're trying to figure out how we really invest in community in ways that are, positive, but also
Right.
like authentic and real, and like, because those are the things that drive people. You know what I mean? How are we getting those young folks connected to those spaces like we were talking about? Right? Like young people in front of elected officials, young
Right.
people in front of corporate executives. How are we getting our stories told at that Netflix studio out on the Mesa? Not just as the camera dudes or the dudes plugging in the lights. Like, how are we getting our young men into those writers' rooms to tell their stories?
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's for me. We want to change the narrative around our community,
Yes.
and then good things will start to come.
Yes. I was so inspired, Rodrigo, when I went to that meeting last week. I was sitting there. I was like, how come I have not been coming to these meetings? Because it was just so informative. And just to see so many different people sitting in that room together, coming up with solutions, I was just like, I need to be coming to. That's why I was like, can I
Yeah.
come?
Yeah, yeah.
you know?
It's a really dope space, and I think we've tried to fill it with dope people who we know are doing things.
Right.
You know what I mean? And those are the folks in the work that we want to surround ourselves with, because they're all in the community. All of them are doing amazing things. Stronger
Right.
Together, Centro Savila, Swap, Maze, Placita. I don't want to leave anybody out, but everybody else who's in
Millions of
all the other
prisoners.
25 organizations in the collaborative, everyone's like doing really amazing things.
Yeah.
Ancestral Lands too. I also want to highlight them. They're hiring right now.
Oh, yeah.
So ancestrallands.org if you want a job, working with the National Park Service, they're sending you to the Grand Canyon and things like that. They pay good, you know what I'm saying, above minimum wage, and so it's a great opportunity to just reconnect with the land for sure. So shout out to them. So I worked for them. It was one of my favorite jobs as well. That we'd go on hitch and we'd go
Teach you how to
camping.
use a chainsaw.
You know what I'm saying? Chainsaw certified, CPR certified. I'm not CPR certified. I need to get CPR. I got a baby. I got to learn how to do
Yeah.
that stuff.
I
But
don't even know CPR either.
definitely, I want to highlight them. But I was thinking back to the kind of the first question you asked Rodrigo, um, like what do we do? You know what I'm saying, for these youth and things like that. That was a question during our March meeting. It was me, Victor, Chris, and some other folks sitting at a table discussing, like, what do we do? And I had said, like, we kind of just need better big homies. And through that, like, it kind of made this whole big idea, like let's really focus on like what was said, better big homies. What does that look like? For me, like, my brother is my big homie, and like,
Right.
if I wanted to smoke, if I wanted to party, his role was he has to punch me first. You know what I'm saying? He's like, you want to smoke, you want to take a hit, I'm gonna punch you. And I didn't want to. I was like, you know what? I don't want to do that. And so it's like, kind of like, how do we highlight that, amplify that, and like build up these leaders to go into schools and to go into the D home and their young people who are just giving a different idea on a different direction of what everyone else could be doing. Not telling you to go shoot, not telling you to go rob, not telling you to go do a beer run,
Right.
not telling you to fucking sell on that zip that somebody just sold you. Like, let's just be better. You know what I'm saying? Better big homies is really what is needed for our young people. So I'm trying to figure out how to, you know, trademark that, LLC it, and really amplify
I love
that for sure.
That's
big
amazing.
homies.
Yeah.
Better big homies is what the next
But that's
project is
what,
for me.
right, absolutely. And I think that's what is needed, because I know if it wasn't for the influence I had, like when I was sharing with you guys about, my experience in the D home, when I got out, I had a mentor. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be where I'm at today.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, yeah, I need to go in a different direction because this is not where I want to stay. And I was in there for 8 days, and 8 days it felt like 8 years, So I definitely commend you on that and think that that's such a great idea, to do that because that's what is needed.
Yeah.
But you guys are all doing such an amazing job in the community, and I just really commend all of you. I mean, because you guys put in a lot of time. You guys put in a lot of time and investment into our community, to make it safer and to love on our kids for everybody. I wish that when my son was out there in the street, and that's how I met Celinda because somebody introduced me to her. But I was calling the cops on my kid. I was calling the cops. I was calling CYFD. I was calling juvenile probation, and nobody would help me. They're like, sorry, there's no New Mexico runaway laws, and I don't know what to tell you. Like, literally nobody would help me. Nobody. And I got so desperate that I got on Crime Stoppers. And I started reporting him and his friends on Crime Stoppers because I was like, my kid's going to get killed out there and nobody's helping me. I felt so helpless. Like, where do I find this help, And like, here you guys are, people, other moms, single moms, or even like Vanessa, Noah came from a good home with the mom and the dad and, the little family there. And, she had problems and she didn't know about organizations like La Placita or SWAP, and I think that it's imperative that people do know about these programs. So if they go through stuff like I did, that they could have help, they could have support. Because I felt hopeless and I felt helpless. And I thought my kid's going to die on the street. And it wasn't till one day somebody reached out to me on Facebook and said, hey, I know this girl named Celinda. She, works with organizing. And I reached out to her and she's like, here's my address. Come to my house right now. So she really helped me through that process, and she made me feel seen and heard. And I didn't feel that way with APD or anybody that should have given me some kind of help or some kind of like, hey, here's a phone number, call these people. It was almost like it was like a bother, that I was calling in because I was constantly calling in. I was like, look, I need help, But anyway, I just want to say thank you guys for being here tonight, for sitting, for, sharing your story, for sharing information with the community, letting them know that there is help available. And we are standing and loving on our youth.
Thank you for having
Yeah,
us.
thank you for having us, and thank you for everything you guys are doing.
Shout out
Yes.
to Linda for sure.
Yeah,
Shout out
yeah,
to
for
Linda.
sure. Selinda's one of those folks who will walk with you through the fire
Yeah.
and have your back,
Yeah.
and she's a community hero.
Yeah,
You
for
know.
sure. Yeah, I always tell her, I was like, oh, I want to be like you when I grow up.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, I'm trying to be like these guys when I grow up.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Of course,
you.
Thank you.